Welcome to Blind Spots, a podcast where we're helping you fill the gap between what you want to do with your money and what you actually do. We are professional investors, writers, and financial planners helping you navigate the complexities of finance to optimize what you can control and cut out the rest. Join your host, Nick Shermans and Aaron Varghese, as we discuss the questions and nuances surrounding everyday money management. Hello everyone, welcome back to another episode of Blind Spots. In our last episode, we talked all about cognitive and emotional biases when it comes to investing. So in part 2 today, we are going to be talking about cognitive and emotional biases when it comes to financial planning. So I'm very excited for this one.
This is in Erin's wheelhouse. For some context, she runs financial plans for all of our clients at Pure. So she's deep in the weeds on this. She can speak to this. And basically what we mean is, what are some common biases or blind spots that people have during the planning process? So by planning, mapping out cash flows, budgeting, Social Security, pensions, stock options, downsizing, taxes, all of these things that go into a successful plan, we've noticed some trends. So Erin's highlighted what, 3 or 4?
3, yeah.
Okay.
There's a lot of overlap.
I don't know how you want to do this. So why don't you tell me how you'd like to unpack these biases?
Well, first I was going to say, for our Pure Portfolios clients, if you haven't run your financial plan or you haven't revisited it in a while, talk to me. And if you're not a client and you would like a financial plan, talk to me. Talk to us.
And if I could interject there and outline one thing that I think is super important, because back in the start of my career, I feel like financial planning was on the back burner. It was all about investment management. So I was groomed to think about investing first. And I think investing is important. I think it's all important.
Yeah.
But a lot of advisors' idea of planning back in the day was to print out a 500-page document, hand it over to someone, basically dust their hands and say, I bid you a successful journey. It was very much transactional. It was a one and done thing.
Yeah.
And thankfully, we've evolved. We've changed, where many advisors aren't specializing, at least any advisors that you'd want to talk to and work with, they aren't specializing in any one thing, but they're trying to incorporate the entire journey. So they're embracing the power of and. You can be a great investor and a really good planner, or have someone on your staff that does that. But what I'm saying is, planning is not transactional. It's not one and done, best of luck. It's very much a journey. It's a process. It's making changes around the margin, running scenarios and seeing how that works out over the next couple of years. It's stress testing. It's a very fluid living document.
Yeah, on our little one-pager of the services and areas that we focus on throughout the financial planning process, we have behavioral coaching. And that's not a therapy session where we ask you about your life's journey. It just kind of comes up throughout the conversation of planning. And it's no coincidence that this podcast is called Blind Spots, because we like to talk about behavioral finance and how blind spots are, or how clients and prospective clients that we've talked to have blind spots in their investments and planning process. But anyways, in the financial planning process, when we kind of uncover the blind spots that our clients have, we will talk about it, because we would be doing you a disservice if we didn't point out, hey, you may be thinking about this because of this, and pointing out those biases. So that's why we're talking about some of those common biases that we see today.
Well, and throughout the planning journey, and then we'll get into your list, I feel like most people have an idea of how things should work in retirement, or how things should work in their financial plan. And oftentimes they have a preconceived answer in the back of their head. And if your answer aligns with them, they're all for it, and they're likely to implement what you're telling them. If their preconceived answer doesn't align with what you're saying, even though you're an objective third party and you're a professional and all that, they'll continue to maybe ask the question in a different way, or keep down their path until you give them the answer that you want. So people don't think there's a behavioral component to a financial plan, but there actually very much is. And that's why Aaron and I are both excited about this podcast.
Yeah, identifying your biases is one thing. So potentially for someone who's listening to this will help them identify maybe something that they're doing. But I feel like many people know some of their pitfalls. You know, people will say, oh, I know I spend too much, or I know I focus on this too much. It's understanding, once you've identified what it is, how to move forward from that is sometimes the hard part, and it takes work. We're not perfect.
So doing
We're all
something
humans.
about it. So
Doing something about it. Mm-hmm.
All right. So enough beating around the bush. Let's
Yeah.
start with the first one.
Okay.
Aaron taking a swig of.
Just getting some water. Okay, let's start with anchoring. This is a pretty broad one. You can anchor to just about anything, but we've got a few examples. So anchoring, yes.
No, I was going to ask you, what does anchoring mean for the audience?
So I came prepared today with official definitions since you caught me off guard last time. So anchoring bias refers to someone's tendency to give a disproportionate weight to potentially the first piece of information that they receive, or any piece of information that they receive in context of making a decision.
So give me a practical example of anchoring practice.
Maybe you heard your buddy say, or you heard an article say that you should take Social Security at your full retirement age. Maybe that's 67 for you. So you say, I'm going to take Social Security at 67, where in reality, maybe you should take it at 65. Maybe you should wait until you're 70. It all depends on your personal situation. That's why we call it personal finance. But because you saw that piece of information, you think that is one and done, applies to you, and all be all info.
Yeah, and here's another example. People anchor to, when we're running through these financial plans, like if their account had a high water mark of $1 million, let's say, and they're below that $1 million mark, like they'll always come back to that. Well, at my high point, I was at $1 million. Now I'm at 925. It's like, well, that's because you've taken out 150,000 over the last 18 months. But I think anchoring can show itself in many different forms. And it's when you're overweighting, or as Aaron said, you're arbitrarily weighting to some data point that somehow serves you best.
Yeah, and it's usually something that we've talked about that takes someone's focus and they go all in on that. They anchor to that one piece of information, and it may not be the most important piece. And so other parts of their financial plan start to kind of fall apart because they're hyper focusing on one area. We've called it leaking oil in the past.
So how can one mitigate the anchoring bias?
I think understanding your full financial picture and how all of the pieces work together is a good starting point. Because if you understand that one decision can affect 30 others, you might not hyperfixate on it. I think looking at the full landscape.
So in other words, and we've said this in the past, not making decisions in a silo, right? And I think the best example, which you talked about, is the social security example, where people think that decision's made in a vacuum, and it's really not. It depends on if you have a pension or not, what your tax rate is, are you working part-time, how is your family history? Like, are you going to live till 150? And I'm using extremes, obviously, but there's so many other variables that go into that decision beyond, hey, a guy on TV said I should take it as early as possible. Well, that's taken out of context. That's siloed off. That's suboptimal.
So look at the full landscape of your financial plan and make decisions based on everything, not just one thing.
Context.
Context is key.
Okay, what's the next one?
Let's talk about enmeshment bias.
That's a fancy word.
That is a fancy word for it's a lot of commingling, and it can come up in a lot of different ways, but we mostly see this where parents and kids, potentially adult kids, have their finances kind of commingled. So we could see this as I gave my child a loan, and now maybe it's a gift, or sometimes it starts when they're much younger and you've given them too much assistance or help, and now they are not able to sustain finances on their own. that kind of commingling, enmeshment of yours is mine, mine is yours. At some point, there tends to be the necessity for separation, and that's difficult.
There's a lot to unpack there.
Yeah.
Trying not to offend people. But it can even be as simple, and I've seen this a lot, of having a adult child, like a 35-year-old, being on their parents' cell phone plan.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's egregious. Or actual monthly assistance. Like I send my 40-year-old son $4,000 a month.
Yeah.
And, it's fine. The family dynamic is different for everybody. There's sensitivities around that. So I don't want to be crude here, but every plan has a breaking point. And I think one thing that we've done a good job of is helping people identify some of these leaks that they have and showing them the breaking points in your plan. So we've been actually running for people, what is your maximum spend each year before your plan breaks? I think people like that, knowing what they have to stay under, what your maximum spend is. And it doesn't matter what we're talking about. I mean, you could have a golf habit, a helping your kid habit, a travel habit, whatever, but having context, understanding what your maximum spend is so you're not leaking oil, as I say, is a huge part to becoming a successful retiree or having a successful end to your plan, which for a lot of folks means not running out of money and being able to do what they want to do.
Right. Not giving up your standard of living.
Didn't we do a podcast about helping kids finding that balance?
Yep, this exact topic. We have an entire podcast episode on it. So that we will link
link that
below for reference. It's a good one.
It could have pissed some people off. Well, because I know family, like I have kids, you don't do anything to help your kids, but at some point it becomes out of balance, if you will, and maybe even some kids take advantage of their parents sometimes, which is a bummer.
Yeah, I mean, there's nuances to everything. You can't give every disclaimer that will cover everyone. So, I mean, you have to take it with a grain of salt. But I think a rational human would understand that. Well, I don't know what rational humans understand.
Can I say something about my kids? Like my kids are always giving me the business. Like, Daddy, you're making us do this, or you're making us do that, or that's not nice, or I don't want to do that. It's like, look, my job as a parent is not to be your friend. It's not to be your buddy. For friends and buddies, that's great. My job is to create a productive human being. So everything that we do is designed to make you a productive, independent member of society. Like that's my job. And, I've heard, my kids are young, but I've heard once the kid is 13 or 14 years old, you basically, that's what you're rolling with. So my job is to be not on them, but just, again, teach them how to be a productive human, because once they get older and their friends are a bigger influence than I am, and they don't want to be seen in public with me, like my job is basically done. And I hope I've done a good job.
Yeah. Showing up is half the battle.
That's right. That's what I always say.
But being a good example is the other half, probably. Okay. Enough on enmeshment. Let's talk about endowment bias.
Okay. What is
that? This is another one that we see quite often. And again, shows up in a few different ways. Official definition is an emotional bias that causes individuals to value an owned object, something that you have in your possession, higher, often irrationally, than its real world market value. So this could be a home that you own. This could be company stock. We see this a lot of times with inheritances, endowment bias.
Well, I mean, you see this a lot in the housing market, or when someone is buying and selling a business. Like, if I own Pure Portfolios, I'm going to value it way up here. The objective market might value it down here. So it tends to involve things that we have a sentimental or emotional attachment to. We can become irrational. And, we've had folks that inherited stock from a grandfather that, helped start a company, and it's become a overwhelmingly large piece of their balance sheet, and they don't want to sell it because there's an emotional attachment to. That's a prime example of endowment bias.
It also happens with company stock, like you pointed out when we were preparing for this episode. You feel that attachment to your company. You've put the blood, sweat, and tears into, the company that has been built around you, and not wanting to give that away comes out a lot.
If you've ever worked with a stubborn seller, like you're trying to buy a house and the sellers lived there for 10 years and uh,
Built it
just
from the ground up.
built it from the ground up and did a remodel a couple years ago, they've got a price point in their head that they think the house is worth. They've mentally calculated what went into that. They might have
Yeah.
raised their kids in that house, and they're anchoring to a certain price or endowing to a certain price or attachment, and they're going to value that more. And you're just coming in as an objective third party. Of course, you have your own baggage as well, but that's how this manifests itself in everyday life.
I would really love to talk to either a real estate agent or like an appraiser and understand. There's a lot of people that say, I'm going to put $30,000 into my kitchen to remodel it before I sell it. I am curious what typically your return on investment is with that, because I see the value of updating and maybe putting in better materials and things like that. But as I was in the market to purchase a house, you'd see all these homes that were probably updated pretty recently, you can tell, but the stuff that they chose was just god awful ugly, and I would want to rip it out. So, what's the real return? I'm just kind of curious.
Well, it's funny you say that. And a lot of people think that real estate, that their home, one, it's Americans' biggest asset on their balance sheet. So,
Mm-hmm.
and there's all these emotional components to it. But in general, like you ask the public, what's a better investment, stocks or a home or real estate? Most will say home.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And the reason is not because home returns are highest over the longest period of time. That's not why people say that. They say it because it's really the only asset class that someone would allow to compound without an interruption. Meaning, a lot of people stay in their homes for 20, 30, or 40 years. Even if you're getting 2% a year over 40 years, that's incredibly powerful. And since real estate is a pain in the you-know-what to sell, and most people don't really think of it as an investment, although some do, most people just want a roof over their head.
Mm-hmm.
That time times reasonable returns equals wealth and equity. And there's really not a blinking, flashing sign that's showing the value of your home on the side of it each day. There's no
Right.
prompt to go and sell that. Again, it's not a liquid asset. It takes effort and intention to sell real estate. But that's why it's so powerful, because humans can't screw it up.
Okay, this might be really off the rails, but I've been wanting to bring this up for a while, and maybe we should just do a whole episode on like renting versus buying. But I agree with the theory that your primary home is not an investment. And I want to phrase this concisely. I was thinking about with renting, every 12 months or whenever your lease is up, you have the opportunity to either re-sign potentially at a little bit of a higher rate or move somewhere else. And like you said, it's not easy to sell a home. There's never an expiration date that comes around regularly that you are like inclined to just sell your home and move somewhere else.
Right.
And I feel like a lot of times that with renting, it can potentially lead to a higher rate of lifestyle inflation, because you have kind of this calendar date that comes up that, well, I'm paying this much here. Maybe I should get a bigger place. Maybe I should do this. And with that comes moving and potentially different furniture and decorations, whatever.
Yeah.
And I was thinking about it the other day that doesn't really happen when you own a home. Every once in a while, you might think it'd be nice to have a different place or a bigger place or whatever, but there's never a set opportunity to really consider it. I don't know if that makes any sense.
That's kind of a hot take. And I can tell you, like, I don't know about all that, but I can say there is under the radar cost of owning a home.
Mm-hmm.
The maintenance, the property taxes, and the lawn care and the landscaping and a potential remodel, or like back to my kids, they've ruined multiple carpets. We've bought new carpets to go over them. We're getting new carpets. We're going to paint the house this year. So there's just always something. Like our decks got some loose boards, probably need to fix that. So there's always something to be done. And I think that's one thing that homeowners don't capture very well, is there is a very real ongoing maintenance cost to owning a home. It's not, oh, I bought my house for $500K, I sold it for $1 million, I just printed a bunch of money. It's like, no, you have to track these ongoing things.
I found a really lengthy blog post that detailed the difference between renting and owning. And there was almost like a break even between the two, between just the rent increases over time and then the maintenance kept up with that. And it's something that people discount. But anyways, off the rails.
No, that's fine. Okay, well, and then the last thing. So we covered the 3 biases. Aaron, you want to rattle those off real quick, and then I'm going to talk about some that are like would be in the cliff notes or like number 4 or number 5.
So we talked about, in reverse order, endowment bias, valuing something that you own higher than what it's probably worth. We talked about enmeshment bias, the commingling of assets and money between usually parents and children. And then we also talked about anchoring, the tendency to disproportionately weigh a piece of data or information and really fixating on that above other things that might also be important or more important.
Okay, so there's 2 things that I want to include. One is, this is something we talked about. One is recognizing your bias, but doing nothing about it. I don't know what that's called, but we often see people acknowledge they have a spending problem, but they do nothing about it. And I was on Twitter, and there was a financial advisor talking about he ran a Monte Carlo for one of his clients, meaning he was going to see if they were going to run out of money or not. And these folks had a spending problem. So what he did was assume a 10% rate of return for the portfolio, which is great by any measure. These folks still ran out of money in like year 8. So a lot of people either know they have a spending problem and don't do anything about it, don't know they have a spending problem and thus don't do anything about it, or what's the third one?
Recognize that they have a spending problem. They're scared to the bones, and then they do something about it.
Right, but a lot of times they'll recognize they have a problem, but they'll kick the can down the road. So
yeah,
that dovetails into my next one.
kind of put it off.
Yeah, that dovetails into my next one, where you can give someone advice and say, hey, look, these are the loose ends of your plan. Like, this is where you're going to fail if you don't make these changes, X, Y, and Z. And we can dial in a plan. A coach can drop a sick play, an out of bounds play in game 7 of the NBA finals. If some player goes rogue and does a step back 3 that's completely not in the script, it doesn't matter what you do. And it's the same thing with financial plans. If you drop a great play and a client is anchoring to something else and doesn't follow through with it, doesn't matter what you do. So I think being coachable, being open-minded to the fact that you might have biases, letting a objective third party guide you through this, even if the decisions can be tough or the conversation's difficult, that tends to lead itself to better outcomes than just to anchoring to whatever you heard on the news or whatever your friend told you or whatever you think in your mind to be true.
Yeah, I couldn't find a direct quote unquote bias for doing something over and over again, kind of expecting a different result. But famously, that is the definition of insanity.
Well, and to put a bow on this, but like, would you agree with this comment that overspending is like the number one problem in the financial planning process, like leading to suboptimal plans?
Yeah.
I mean,
Or just not knowing.
Second?
Is there a close second to overspending? I was going to say gifting and like helping others like outside of the realm of
what's possible.
Yeah. But that's kind of in the spending realm.
Okay, well, let's put a bow on this. We're approaching 30 minutes, which is egregious.
Okay, well, I hope that you learned something and identified maybe some of your cognitive and emotional biases, or maybe if we talked about one that resonated with you, you have an idea of maybe what to do next to help mitigate that. So if you have any questions, as always, you can reach out to us at insight@pureportfolios.com. We'd love to hear your thoughts and feedback. We will see you in the next episode.